This conversation is part of an interview project through the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. We're speaking with Yale alumni in order to more deeply understand the hearts and minds of those who work at the intersection of spiritual leadership and environmental action. Today, we are grateful to be joined by the Reverend Dr. Andrew Barnett. Andy is an Episcopal priest, musician, and educator focused on local climate partnerships. He's the Associate Rector for Program at the All Saints Episcopal Church in Atlanta. As founding director of the Theodicy Jazz Collective, Andy has performed broadly across the United States and England. In his environmental work, Andy researched and wrote for the Presidential Climate Action Plan, a menu of policy options that was presented to President Obama and informed that administration's climate action. As a teacher, Andy is passionate about local and global partnerships, aiming to love God, love our neighbors, and change the world. I want to start kind of just asking a little bit about these many hats that you wear in your work and in your life, both as in your clergy work, as a musician, as an educator, someone committed to climate action. Can you tell me a little bit about how your interest in these intersections first got started and how they've sort of developed into the work that you do now?
Sure. Yeah, and thanks for the project. I love what you're doing. So, I think the earliest place it started was just being a kid in the woods, making forts and paddling the boundary waters in northern Minnesota, right where there's an intersection between Minnesota and Canada that's basically just forest and lakes and rivers and wetlands for like hundreds of miles. And camping and being in the mountains with scouts and just having this sense of beauty and awe and a sense of sort of like coming of one's own that I experienced growing up outside. So I've always just been really passionate about it, especially helping kids get connected with that outdoor world. And then coming through in education, I had a really powerful experience at Oberlin working with a guy named David Orr, who kind of thinks about how we think, how we shape our hearts and minds as at least as much as how we shape our sort of economic outlook. So he had this essay I remember reading, the following stats crossed my desk today, and then it was sort of like all of like the environmental metrics that tell you like how bad it is. And then he said, ozone and climate change and acid rain and ocean acidification and the list goes on, right? Forever chemicals and everything else. And then he said, these were not the accidental achievements of uneducated people. These were the predictable results of folks who had like doctorates and MBAs and graduate degrees. And we taught them that the consequences of their actions don't matter. That basically like the profit that you're about to make is the most important number you need to pay attention to. And he said, what if we thought about education differently? What if we thought about education as sort of forming people and citizens and neighbors and people who love in every way? And that just really, really spoke to me. And so I started taking classes at Oberlin in environmental science, environmental studies, and I just got the bug. I'm very passionate about learning and thinking about how complex systems come together, and then learning, of course, the incredible consequences of climate change, which with massive moral implications. I remember there was one class where he was talking about sort of the moral framework of climate. And we have a word for like murder, and we have a word for theft, and we have a sort of an ethical construct for selfishness, but we don't even have an ethical framework for like a predictable global devastating outcome that is directly linked to the actions of all of us, none of which have evil intentions, but all of which are basically negative externalities, the pollution from our energy use. Basically, we don't have an ethical framework for that. We have an economic one, externalities, but ethically we don't have one. It's not the same as murder, it's not the same as theft, but in many ways it has the exact consequence. So like we need a new ethics, we need a new like philosophical framing. And all the while, especially as I was learning how climate change had such a massive impact on issues I care about, and also I was coming up in church and playing music in church, I thought, my gosh, this is something that people ought to really be focusing on in Christian communities. And when I grew up and when I was sort of attending things, it was just not on the docket. It was not something folks were talking about. So I was very excited to find a way to help the church talk about environmental stewardship and creation care and climate justice and all those things in ways that sort of translated in our context. And along the way, I heard about this amazing program at Yale, and I didn't even know who John Graham and Mary Evelyn Tucker were, but I knew about that field and the work they were doing. And I was at a conference that David had put together with our then dean of the environment school, Gus Speth, and he said, we just brought in these two like incredible scholars. You really ought to come meet them and talk to them. And I had no idea that I was about to just spend 4 of the best years of my life just in amazing friendship and dialogue and classwork and conversation with these two amazing people. And of course, their field of work is like a massive but the best way to describe it is, the great work that Thomas Berry described was just they had such incredible passion and motivation for that work and for connecting with students and for sort of empowering us and sending us out in the world to do that kind of work. And there was a really amazing cohort of other students who continue to this day to be close friends. So I'm just incredibly grateful for all those experiences flowing together. I think the short answer of sort of how does all this fit together is um, I feel really called to help lead communities of faith to make a difference in the neighborhood and the world. And I think that we do that through story, through meaning, through connection, through relationship, through things that we feel at least as much as things that we think. So I'm very passionate about helping communities, especially sing together and imagine a just, compassionate world, and then mobilize everything we have, including our significant resources and political connections and relationships across the country to build the different world, to imagine and build a different world.
Yeah. That's really powerful, just like what you said of we build a better world as much by what we feel, like changing what we feel or through what we feel than by what we think.
Because I'm like fascinated by this most recent election in particular, right? So like people who like voted against their own rational economic self-interest, like aggressively so,
Right.
because they felt a story that really connected with them, like, Trump's for you, or like these guys are going to come out there and like fight for you. We know, of course, that was an abject lie, but the people who voted that way absolutely feel that way.
Yeah.
And it drove incredibly consequential actions. I'm not saying we want to manipulate that, but I think like it illustrates that like as a species, we go as much with gut as we do with head. So I think phrased positively, when we can find a way to combine head and heart in a meaningful way, in an authentic and honest way, then that's sort of powerful because I don't think anybody changed their feelings based on a pie chart. Even though I love data and science,
Yeah.
rational thought, all that's true, and also you got to like tell a story.
Right. Right. So you already mentioned bringing together people in song as one kind of way in which we can connect to that sense of kind of touching into heart space together. Yeah, I'm curious to hear about other sort of ways in that you use in your work, and that also may include sort of textual traditions, ritual traditions that um, that you're kind of utilizing to connect with a sense of an ecological message, a sense of interconnectedness, care for uh, the neighborhood and the world, as you said. Um,
Yeah. So if I could just flesh out that music piece, because I think it's huge.
yeah.
So we're having this conversation. I'm talking to you from Atlanta, which is absolutely the heart of the civil rights movement. We're about 2 miles here from Dr. King's house and church, Ebenezer Baptist Church, where, among other things, John Lewis went to church every Sunday he was in town. And he is famous for all kinds of important work, including his sort of teaching around good trouble, his willingness to encourage folks to participate in civil disobedience, nonviolent civil disobedience, which specifically means if you think a law is unjust, you have to be willing to accept the consequences of breaking that law. Religious freedom is not I dislike a law and therefore I shouldn't have consequences for breaking it, which is how it's currently being construed. It's actually this law is unjust based on my understanding of my tradition, and I'm willing to accept the consequences of breaking it, which can include jail. That was John Lewis's um, one of his many contributions. And as he was paying attention to a lot of the movements that were coming up over the past few years, in particular the Black Lives Matter movement, he said he was so inspired. He wanted to go see Black Lives Matter Plaza before he died. He walked it with a walker the day before he died. And he said, I'm so inspired, and this movement needs a song. It's missing that because in the civil rights movement, which can easily be sort of, you know, um, sanitized, domesticated, made to seem a little bit too sing-songy in a way. It was actually horrifying. People were experiencing trauma and fear and threats, and so it was. I don't mean to in any way um, make it seem like it was an easy walk, but they sang together all the time. They prepared themselves spiritually for their demonstrations. That was a huge part of the Soul Force movement that King talked about. And Mahalia Jackson was a huge part of that work. So, for example, in the March on Washington, he's giving this talk that was going to become the I Have a Dream speech. And it's kind of long and almost wonkish, like here's the policy proposals for the Civil Rights Act and all that. And because Mahalia Jackson had been like on the like church house like pulpit with him for many, many years, she had heard the talk that he wanted to give the country needed to hear, which is the I Have a Dream speech. And she sang right before him most of the time, often Precious Lord or If I Can Help Somebody. And in the middle of the talk, with all the cameras rolling and all those tens of thousands of folks watching, she said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." And here he goes off book and he says, "I have a dream." And he goes on from there because it was on his heart and he was improvising, but he was riffing. And so the musical community, together with the sort of preaching community, got together and told a story that captured the heart of the country and changed the course of our future. Also, along the way, they were singing it's easier to focus on what unites us, than what divides us when you're singing next to somebody, when you have a little bit of movement, or when you have a meal together, or when you have um, when you do things with your bodies together, there's a chance to feel a sense of connection because we're creatures, we're incarnate, you know. So I think music is just massively, massively important and powerful because it touches both head and heart, right? Like you can hear that's like a really hip, chord or a beautiful song or a great orchestration, but you also feel something in your heart. Like Simple Gifts. I used to work at a Shaker school where they wrote the people there wrote Simple Gifts. Super simple melody, pentatonic melody. It goes on from there. That's so powerful. I mean, that you feel
Yeah.
something when you hear that. It's like Appalachian Spring, which Copeland then turns into this like majestic. Ba da ba da di da 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 da
Mm.
da 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 di da bo bum dum o da o da 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 di da bum 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 bum. That's powerful. That
Mhm.
speaks beyond it's beyond words, right? So I can go on and on about music, but it really matters. John Baptiste right now, he's playing sold out theaters with thousands of people. The first thing he's doing, he's not wowing them with the virtuosity. He's not playing scales. He's getting the whole room to sing This Little Light of Mine.
Mm.
I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. So it's just so powerful.
Yeah.
In terms of texts and traditions, there's a lot. I've got a shelf full of books back here, but I think the first day of the Genesis 1, the sixth day of creation, where Yahweh gives sort of operating instructions to humanity, and there's a whole sermon in there, like what does dominion or stewardship mean in that sort of set of instructions. But the first thing God says to people in the entire scripture is how to live with this new creation. Then I love Psalm 104, which is sort of like a nature hike through scriptures. There's like the Leviathan and the badger and the birds and the trees and the water and the grass. Um, the Psalms have many genres, but this one is basically a praise psalm. Um, oh God, how many are your works in wisdom you made them all, or how manifold are your works in wisdom you made them all. That's a really cool psalm to read from the top of a mountain or from the bottom of a really deep tree canopy. One of the people that Mary Evelyn connected me with was an amazing biologist named Tom Lovejoy. And he was like when he was a little kid, like growing up, he was at a school that had like a, you know, greenhouse and like small zoo. And he just like fell in love with these animals and plants. And he became like one of the most important conservation biologists like that ever lived. The term biodiversity, like the notion of like the number of species within a given area is something you can measure. And the more biodiverse an area is, the more valuable it is. He came up with that was his idea. And he was famous for bringing like Al Gore and Nancy Pelosi and like presidents and business leaders and friends to the canopy in the Amazon in Brazil and just doing like a 6 day trip that would change your life. And we actually had a trip in the works. We were going to try and bring um, religious leaders to the rainforest canopy. And then sadly he died. But that's the kind of stuff that they were able to do. They were able to connect us with all these like thought leaders and say like, hey, let's bring what they're doing to religious communities.
Mm-hmm.
You asked about texts as well as rituals. You know, um, Christian ritual, especially in sort of the Episcopal branch of the church, people love their traditions. They love their prayers and their hymns that they kind of grew up with and they knew. And I'm excited about gently expanding those rituals and prayers and traditions. Um, but you know, you got to go slow. And one of the most effective ways I know to help like Episcopal Christians like connect with creation is to just do like our liturgies outside, like communion outside, baptism outside, confirmation outside, Easter Vigil outside, celebration for Earth Day outside, blessing of the animals, like St. Francis, blessing the animals outside. There's something really incredible about fresh air and wind and sun that changes how you feel, changes your facial expression, changes the way you talk. Um, so we do things like that. We go to this really cool camp near here called Canuga, which is like, you know, a place set apart in the mountains with mist rising over the streams and a beautiful lake that's full of fish, mostly bass. And it's pretty cool to say communion out there, you know, looking over the water in the mountains. Um, and the other thing I would say too is that St. Francis is a really cool entry point for Christians to talk about creation because, of course, he's the patron saint of animals and everybody loves their dogs. And I have 2 dogs, I love them. So if you do blessing the animals outside, you can do pet adoptions, you can do like creation care, and you can like fold that into the sermon. And there's a lot to say about Francis beyond just the fact that like everyone loves their puppies. Like he's a radical guy. And the fact that this most recent pope took the name of Francis was an incredible testament to like the call of the church to be with the poor, which means that, you know, climate change affects poor communities first, hardest, and longest, and last. So if we want to credibly be an institution that speaks with, to, and for, and advocates for, and makes a difference for the lives of the popes who are poor, we got to take climate change very seriously.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for bringing in song and for singing and for it's just really really moving to hear about the power of song, and as well as the power of being outside together and doing our spiritual practices outside together, as bodies, as creatures with one another. So all of that feels really, yeah, really powerful. As you're talking about, you know, climate change and climate crisis, ecological crisis, I'm curious to ask kind of how you and the people that you're serving, that you're working with, um, are sort of navigating or experiencing grief, anxiety, other kind of emotions around um, ecological destruction or loss, and how you meet that, navigate that.
That's a great question. And also, as you mentioned, I'll say one more thing about music, and I'll come back to that. Um, there's a very famous composer named Richard or Richard Strauss, and he wrote a piece called the Alpine Symphony. And it's based on a story of him and his friends, about 4 of his friends when they were teenagers, climbing a mountain being all excited about like the sunrise and the summit, and then like coming down and getting just drenched in a rainstorm and getting lost in the woods and being scared in the dark woods and encountering some kind of monster. So he writes this like epic, like 1 hour long tone poem for like
Wow.
125 instrumentalists, become this massive like symphonic work, one of the most significant pieces he ever wrote, based on an experience he had as a little kid getting out in the woods, and like he never forgot it. There's a story of like Mahler and other famous folks being at a premiere or something he was conducting, and they all came into town. He's like, you know what? We have about 6 hours. Let's go to the mountains, guys. And they get back like half an hour before curtain, you know?
Wow.
So this is one of the ways I'm responding to your question. So
Yeah.
I think the first thing we have to say is like for the folks who are following, paying attention to the sort of the the metrics of the health of the earth. Um, if it was sort of imagine like a hospital room and there's all these monitors on the patient. Imagine the patient is the earth, right? And if it was like not going well, and like suddenly like all the alarms are just blaring, everything you can measure is getting worse so much faster than anyone expected. And you can go to the list: biodiversity, species loss, climate for sure, air quality, water pollution. I mean, everything is just getting like dramatically worse as a direct consequence of these horrific policies of the Trump administration. So you have to name that really specifically, and that is probably the worst thing that's happened for the planet in recent history that I can think of. I mean, it's just awful. Um, and also, that's not all that helpful to name because there's not a lot we can do about that. We can mobilize and write and vote and all that, which we should do. But we got at least another like till the midterms before we can do much. So what do you do? Like, do you be part of the lawsuits, give money to the organizations that are fighting that? I think that's all fine. Call the senators, that's all helpful. Um, and then what? At a certain point, people get kind of worn out from doing that. I feel that way. Um, I think it's really important to tend like to guard our own joy and guard our own peace, because you want to think about this as a marathon, not a sprint. Like these challenges will stay with us till we die, and then our grandkids will pick them up. So we got to sort of be here for the long haul. Um, and that means tending to the people we love and being as kind and gracious as we can to them, participating in the spiritual practices that are life-giving, um, making a difference in our neighborhood. And I think for me anyways, finding like guarding my peace, guarding my joy is to like remember why you love it. I remember this quote, and I'm forgetting who said it, but we will not fight to save a thing we do not love. You got to remember why you love it. I remember very specifically, Mary Evelyn said, you got to find the inspiration for the perspiration. Because at
Mm.
a certain point, like otherwise, you're just going to burn out. And people like Mary Evelyn and John and David Orr and Gus Beth and others who have given their lives to this and who have seen the ups and downs, and they've seen the administrations come and go, and they've seen the political winds shift. You just can't give up. You've got to find a way to keep on keeping on. Um, and I think for me, anyways, so much of that comes down to being part of an authentic Christian community, of a community where people are like um, taking care of each other. For example, my mom is going through some cancer treatment, small church in Minneapolis, and there are probably not more than 120 folks on a Sunday. And they've got a meal train. They're driving her to appointments. They're praying for her. They are wearing masks and washing their hands and checking in on the phone. And they're rooting for her. And I mean, here I am over 1,000 miles away, just so deeply moved by this small group of boomers that love each other and are taking care of each other. Uh, it's so inspiring. We, I want to be reminded that sort of the better angels of our nature, like they're still in there,
Mm.
for all the evil that's being displayed, especially in the name of Christianity on TV right now. I want to be reminded that that's actually not the religion of Jesus. He's all about mercy and compassion and justice and making a difference in the neighborhood. And the best way to be reminded of that is to be part of a community that's practicing it. So that doesn't, and then of course we could do all that, and then they'll still like, slash and burn the forests and, you know, let go of all the regulations and toast the climate and make $1 billion along the way. And like that's horrible. And also, like, we can only do so much, and we got to guard our peace, and we've got to take care of our people,
Mhm.
and like keep on keeping on. It's sort of like, well, here's a great way to say it. Howard Thurman was the sort of the one of the mystic activists that really informed King's thinking.
Mm.
And when Dr. King traveled, he encountered Thurman at Morehouse, which is here in Atlanta, when he was like a college student. And he traveled with the Bible and with with Thurman's book Jesus and the Disinherited. And Thurman and many others developed this kind of practice of being a mystic and an activist, like having a deep prayer life, a deep commitment to spiritual practice, and a commitment to the actual incarnate embodied outcomes in the world. And they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So it seems to me like one of the things we're called to right now is to, if we can, dive. You know how when you jump, when you're above water and there's like all the wind and all the waves and all like, it's just like sound, and then you go underwater and it's just like
Mm.
silence. I think we're called to like go under the water to the point where we can be quiet, where we can get centered, and we can discern the work God has for us to do in the world. And then from there, like get at it, but like don't let the
Mm.
noise distract us. Don't let the noise pull us away. They're trying to flood the zone. They're trying to scare us. They're trying to like make us think we're powerless. We're not. They're the ones who are actually grasping at straws. But we have to organize and we have to get committed and um we have to build a movement again. It's not enough to speak to our base. We have to build a movement.
Oh, thank you for, I mean, it's like I'm feeling so stirred and inspired.
Okay, I got one.
Yeah.
There's a piece in the Times, of course, and when you watch this will be ancient history, but Times called "How to Win an Environmental Fight" right
Mm.
now. It came out yesterday,
Mm.
and it's talking about the forever chemicals, the
Mhm.
PFAS, PFAOS stuff that goes into Teflon and other plastics. Um, so 3M, a company I really like, they're in Minnesota, is one of the world's biggest producers of these plastics. They're called forever chemicals. In very small doses, at parts per billion, they cause like just awful cancers that will just mutilate your body as a teenager, you know? Well, there's a young girl in Minnesota who I happen to know and really admire. She sadly died. Her name was Amara Strand. And she got just like, a crazy cancer when she was a teenager. Like, had to take out her liver, or parts of her liver, and like a huge tumor in the middle of her abdomen, super painful surgeries, and like a horrible existence, right? Like, she knew that she was dying. It was very hard for her to speak. It was very hard for her to get dressed and go out of the house. And here she was, like recording music with her friends and speaking to the state legislature all the time. And Minnesota passed the first in the country, basically partial ban on these forever chemicals called Amara's Law.
Wow.
And they passed it shortly after she died. Now there are over 30 states who have passed these, and not just blue states and red states. And it's one of the few things that even under this crazy, like non-rational administration, they're still going to regulate these things because there's such a public demand. There's a movement that's being built that says like this is not the kind of country we want to have. 3M is going to stop making these chemicals at the end of this year, even though they're massively profitable because the movement has risen up. And so I think at the end of the day, you got to speak to the heart of folks. Like William Barber went to the Capitol and prayed because in Jeremiah it says, "Go to the palace of the king and talk to the king about what he's doing." And I think we just have to be like, we have to build a movement. We have to be vocal, and we have to stand up for who we are and what we believe in. And I think people will be drawn to that because there's a very clear sense that like you can tell the genuine article when you see it. Someone is like, they've got a sense of conviction that's like not like dogmatic or like off-putting or like judgmental, but like you know who they are and then what they stand for. You want to be part of that, and then I'm very drawn to leaders like that.
Yeah, right. And it kind of connects back to this piece around storytelling, and how we feel.
Thomas
Um,
Berry said, "We are in trouble just now because we have the wrong story. It's all a question of story."
mhm, mhm.
That whole
Yeah.
like Journey of the Universe project was like, what if the great story is that we are part of something massive and beautiful and stunning?
Mhm.
And as a result, blinking in that unsettling light, right? Like, what if one of our great callings could be for that whole creation, that whole earth community to flourish?
Mhm.
That was important to all of us. We would do things really differently. But the way you start is with a sense of awe and wonder and beauty, I think.
Right.
Much more like, and if you don't, like climate change is bad for your kids. Like nobody cares. But someone at the top of a mountain, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. They're gonna be like, that is gorgeous. How do we make sure that my kids can see that?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. There's so much just yeah, really deep wisdom and inspiration here. So I'm really, really appreciative and moved.
And I want to say too,
So
like,
yeah.
I'm a committed Christian. I think the work of Jesus in the world is really important. And also I'm really excited about interfaith dialogue. So I'm, excited for you going to rabbinical school. And I think this is one of the great points of commonality among many of the world's religions is like
Mhm.
a sense of our responsibility to our neighbor.
Yeah,
And that in order to care for our neighbor, we have to care for our home. And
right.
across the religions, there's also like a very consistent thread that like what God has created is good and beautiful. And for various reasons across the religions, there's a really strong sense like, and we are called to conserve, protect, and maintain it.
Right. Right, right. And this kind of being able to move between these different scales of our belonging, right? Like that
Yeah.
kind of as close to us as our own breath, singing, right? And then as wide as kind of our sense of yeah, this
Yeah.
universe and being a part of creation and being able to move between those is feels to me like a part of the spiritual work is to be able to find ourselves in motion there.
Yeah, and like think about so for example, we're thinking about like rituals, right? So like water is I can think of three religions for whom water is really, really, really important. I'm thinking about Christianity and baptism, right? Like the waters of baptism, being washed, but that has deeply Jewish roots. Like John the Baptist, who baptizes Jesus, who at that point was a very faithful Jew, like he's doing a Jewish ritual of cleansing and purification,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
And then you think about all the folks in India of various religions going to the Ganges, right? To be washed, to bury the dead, like those bodies of water are like religiously significant. And then for the native people, water was across different traditions for different reasons central to their cosmology.
yeah, yeah.
So I mean,
That's
also like I love chemistry. Like we all drink it every day. Like our bodies are 80% water.
mm,
And as we're looking at planets all over the universe, all over the galaxies we can still see, like one of the first things we look for is water.
mm,
And the second thing we look for from their like atmospheric sort of chemical imprint, like if the light from a star is going through the atmosphere at the right angle, we can see based on the color of the light what's in their atmosphere.
mm,
And there's a particular molecule that comes from sea creatures, like basically like sea algae, that if it's in the air, in the atmosphere, there's a very strong likelihood that there is some kind of marine life on that planet. And we know that because of the color of the light coming through the stars. But the whole thing's coming from water. You can't happen
mm.
without it.
Wow, wow,
Isn't that cool?
amazing, amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
wow.
Or think about like, like the primordial goo from which like some like unlucky, I don't know, slug crawled at some point. Like it's
Yeah,
all it
right, right.
starts
Yeah, the womb,
right?
water. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
How cool is it? Like
yeah,
that's in a ritual, right? Like little
right.
baby baptized 6 babies on Sunday, little
Mm,
babies, and like the kids come up and they see the water in the font and um something very, very ancient about
yeah,
pure, clean water.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So unfortunately we have to wrap up just about now. Um, yeah, I have so many more questions for you, but I'll just say as an appreciation, I didn't get to kind of ask you about this, but I just love just a minute ago you said I love chemistry. And I also like just want to lift up the ways in which you are kind of uh it strikes me acting as like a translator in a lot of ways between these different
Oh,
kinds
cool.
of forms of asking similar questions around what our role and what our responsibility and what our kind of sense of belonging is in
Oh,
this
okay.
larger world. Yeah.
I,
Please.
The second half of what I said was less helpful. I think you're talking about sort of like faith and science, belief and reason, doubt, questions, all sitting and living together, right? So I think there are several points of commonality between like science and religion writ large. One of them is a sense of awe, which we're kind of talking about, like
Mhm.
the chemical that's in our atmosphere that comes from marine life, that almost certainly only comes from marine life. And when we can see that chemical in some other planets atmosphere, we're like, okay, that's 78 light years away,
Yeah.
but there might be a planet out there with something swimming around the oceans. Like that is so cool to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's awe, or like the sense of like a caterpillar spins some stuff around itself and comes out what used to look like a worm now can fly all the way to Mexico from Canada. That's crazy. Or an albatross with a wingspan of 6 feet can fly for years and go days without eating or drinking and sleep while it's flying. And navigate all around the world with nothing but the sun, moon, and stars. And go to the right island and lay
Mhm.
the same eggs, or a salmon who can like wait for the high tide to go up the stream where that little salmon was born as a tiny little fish that big with a brain that was that big. Somehow that is all happened. That's a sense of awe. That's so cool, right?
Yeah.
I think that another really important sense of connection between science and religion is a sense of ethics, right? So like in science, you try really hard to be an honest broker of policy alternatives. So you're like, okay, well, here's what's happening. CO2 does this and temperature does this. And like, I don't want to tell you what you're supposed to do, but like, that's something you might want to think about. And so like, the scientists have for so long, like tried to just like tell policymakers what's happening, and then they can evaluate those things and decide what they might or might not want to do, right? But now, when the ethical consequences of what scientists are learning are so grave, there's an important question like, should scientists at any point like take a stand and say what they think that we ought to do based on what they're learning? And so that's a huge, important connect overlap between science and religion, sense of ethics. Like, what ought we to do given what we know? And of course, we're not always going to agree on that. But like one of the basic foundations of most people's sense of ethics is the golden rule, like do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Almost all the religions have some version of that. I've also heard the platinum rule, like do unto others what you think they would like you to do unto them, which is a base point, like I would like you to not poison me, make it impossible for me to grow crops, steal my land, and make it impossible for me to like get water. Like those are
Yeah.
things that I would like you to not do to me.
Yeah.
So therefore, I might want to not do those to you, like the global south or people in low-income communities or whatever. So ethics and awe
Yeah.
are sense. And then I guess the last thing I'd say is that because I think we're storytelling creatures, we're meaning-making creatures, we want to make sense of the world through like how we think and feel head and heart together. I think people of faith, religion writ large, have this incredible opportunity to like make a different world because of the stories we're telling, the stories we want to be part of. And like, all those times when we're so down and we're so like out of ideas, like we have stories of faith where a lot of people in our background felt that way too. Like I have a feeling 40 years in the desert, the Israelites like, this sucks. Like, I don't know if I want to keep following this Moses guy. And they didn't give up and they kept on going. Or like all the ways that like the prophets and the storytellers and all the way through, like they spoke truth to power because they couldn't not.
Yeah.
I think we got to do that too. We got to go to the
Yeah.
palace and pray,
Mm-mm. Mm.
take a stand.
What a beautiful place to take us to. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for such a heart-opening and really inspiring conversation. So I'm really, really appreciative, grateful.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tali.
Thank you.